Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Sorry for the little delay here, but we'll get rolling because we have a lot to cover over a short period of time. This is the August 17th short-term rental stakeholder meeting. Today, we're talking to permit holders. And yesterday, we spoke with management companies, and we've got 2 more after today. But I want to first thank you all for attending and appreciate your time and your attention to this. It's an important issue facing the city, and having more input and discussions is, in my opinion and the subcommittee's opinion, a valuable effort. And with that, I want to start with introducing this subcommittee, starting with Vice Chair Roy Donor. We also have on here city staff, including Senior Planner John Chiampa, Community Development Director Brenda Wisniewski, City Attorney Jennifer Farrell. I think I saw John Rossler and Allison Peterson. We also have several community members or permit holders, and I'd like to do just a real quick intro for each one of you. I'm just going to say your name, or if you've got a phone number, I'll just announce that. So I'll start with the top here with Deanna Slocum. Just introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Deanna, and I am a short-term rental permit owner. I have 1 home in Dana Point that I short-term rent.
Great, thank you. And next up, Miriam Rupke.
Hi, I'm Miriam Rupke. I am a short-term rental permit owner. I'm also a property manager, so I do both. I have a duplex that I own and manage in Capistrano Beach.
Great, thank you, Miriam. And Jay Stanford.
Yes, I'm Jeff Stanford. My wife and I own a condo in Building 2, and we've owned since 2013, and we're also short-term rental holders. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And there's one call in, it looks like 949-632-29957. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. Not sure who that is. Can the phone number 632-9957 give us a brief introduction? Okay, let's keep going here, and we'll address that later. So we did introductions. We're going to do today. What we're going to do is a quick update to where we're at. We'll talk a little bit about the process that we're using to evaluate short-term rentals. Talk and share some of the existing current statistics, and then go over recommendations or get some of your input relative to the regulations in this next phase. Closing out with Q&A, and like we did yesterday, we really try to make this as much of a dialogue as possible, giving everybody adequate time to address the comments and questions that we present to you, as well as get your feedback. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide here. And what you may recall from the last stakeholder meeting, if you did attend, we started this process based on direction we got from the city council. That direction included maintaining the character of our neighborhoods and really looking to discourage neighborhood or absentee corporate investment, as well as protect against nuisances. And I think we did a good job as a city and as a group in that first phase, really looking at some of the existing rules and regulations, and then balancing the rights and responsibilities of homeowners, as well as honoring HOA regulations. And that was the direction we got from the city council. And this subcommittee was formed based on that direction to really try to dig into these issues and come back with a proposal that could ultimately get approved throughout the process, whether it's at the city or the Coastal Commission. As you recall, based on that, we moved forward with, and based on the previous process we went through, we moved forward with some minor changes to the regulations. Probably the most notable one is an annual noticing requirement that is part of your renewal process. We also looked at and implemented some provisions relative to occupancy and daytime occupancy. Again, all those really geared towards addressing the neighborhood impacts and nuisance abatement. We also remain, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, we kept the 2-night provision, even though the Coastal Commission had asked for a 1-night minimum stay. And then in the whole process, as we were working through this, some new legal case came down, and that legal case is really going to be part of how we move forward, because it gave us some guidance, or at least how the courts are going to rule on any future cases. And I'll let the city attorney jump in here, Jen, and if you could just give us a quick breakdown of the Santa Barbara case and how it impacts Dana Point.
Yeah, absolutely. So this case involved the city of Santa Barbara, and they effectively changed how they classified short-term rentals from residential uses at one point in time to hotels. And they did that without going to the Coastal Commission for any sort of approval. And the specific holding of the case is, nothing earth-shattering to any of us, that we have to go to Coastal Commission before we change any of our land use designations. What was the most interesting part of the case was that if you dig into the Coastal Commission's briefs relating to that they filed in the action, the Coastal Commission takes the position that short-term rentals are a residential use and effectively, have to be permitted throughout the city, or at least in the coastal zone. Sorry. We, of course, have disputed in the past and continue to dispute that position on the one hand. On the other hand, it gives us pretty significant insight into where the Coastal Commission's head is, and potentially what a court might rule if we were ever faced to litigate the issue.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate the update, or the details there. And as we start moving forward, really, I think one of the things I want to share is sort of the framework that we've developed. And that framework was developed based on the feedback we got from the direction at the City Council, the community surveys that we did, guidance that we've received from the Coastal Commission, as well as the legal case. We've also looked at the code enforcement data. And again, that first phase that we worked on together, that community input, including the stakeholder outreach that we did, is really the basis for where we're at today and how we move forward with some proposed regulations. I want to go ahead and hand this over to John. John, I want you, if you could just share with us, what we've really established 3 different types of STRs, or that's the thinking at least, that there's really 3 types. And if you could walk through those and then share with us also the data about existing permits.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so essentially in going through this process and looking at other cities, as well as the makeup of short-term rentals within the city of Dana Point, we've really identified 3 types of short-term rentals. The first being a homestay, where essentially the property owner is renting out their primary residence while they are still residing in the residence. So this could be either renting out one or several rooms of your home, or if it is a multifamily property, let's say a duplex or a triplex, maybe they live in one of the units and they rent out one of the other units at a short-term rental, less than 30 days. So there's a number of different configurations that this could be. But that is one of the types of short-term rentals. The other is a primary residence. So this would be a property that is the primary residence of the property owner, and it is rented when they are not residing in the property. So this could be someone who travels seasonally, or like, for example, a teacher who may travel for the winter and the summer and would like to rent out their property for some additional income when they're not there. Then next is the non-primary residence. And so that's what most people see as the typical short-term rental, where the property is owned and the owner does not reside in it, and it's rented on a regular basis to people of 30 days or less than 30 days. So with that, we're going to give you a little data in looking at and moving forward with phase 2. The city felt like it would be important to really kind of digest some of the data that we have. What are the existing conditions out there to kind of assess what we have, and then also consider some of the other potential regulations and that could be necessary. So what we have here is a map of the city, and the different points are plotted identifying short-term rentals throughout the city. We've also identified in that faint dotted blue line that kind of meanders through the city. That is the city's coastal zone. And then we've also identified 3 general zoning types throughout the city. The yellow is all of the single family residential zones. The orange is the multifamily residential zones. And then the mixed use zones is in brown. So in going through this and mapping the different all of the short-term rentals as well as the zones, the city also identified the different zoning districts. So to break it down by district, in District 1, we have 30 short-term rentals. In District 2, we have 4. In District 3, we have 5. In District 4, we have 42. In District 5, we've broken out into 2 groups, one being the Capo Beach area, which has 20, and then the Beach Road community, which has 34. Some additional statistics that we have are that in the breakdown of the different zone types, it really falls into 2 zone types, one being multifamily residential, which has 93 active permits. And then in the single family residential, we have 42 active permits. Then when you look at permits within and out of the coastal zone, we have 71 that are within the coastal zone and 64 that are out of the coastal zone. And then when you look at the different types of short-term rentals that I just identified, the overwhelming majority are the non-primary or your traditional short-term rental, which is 123. And then we have 6 primary short-term rentals and 6 homestay short-term rentals. So that gives you a general sense in terms of a lot of the key parameters and zones and layout of the short-term rentals throughout the city.
Can you refresh
Okay,
my
great.
recollection of the districts? I don't see where they're denoted on the map, but District 1 is to the far left, District 2 is center. Is that how it breaks down? District 5, I know is capital.
District 1 is to the far north. It makes up predominantly the Monarch Bay Terrace, the Ritz Point, and then some of those other communities as you get towards the Headlands properties and into Niguel Shores. Then in District 2 is kind of central northern portion of the city. District 4 is a Lantern District area. Then District 3 is a lot of Doheny Village and up into the Stonehill area of the city. And then District 5 is essentially Capo Beach and the Beach Road community.
Cool, thank you.
Great, thanks, John. Great little information here for us to think about. So as we move into this, is the sort of the interactive part of the conversation with all of you today. It's really talking about the framework and how do we move forward and what should we move forward with. This is where we're going to ask you some questions. So each one of these slides, I think we have 4 or 5 are in some ways related. So I'm going to ask that if to try to keep the time within the allowed time up till 5. Repetitive comments aren't needed. We are recording this, so we'll be able to go back and look at it. But I'm going to go ahead and just let you guys unmute yourself, and whoever speaks first has the mic. I've asked you to be respectful to each person who's sharing. And really the first question to the stakeholders is, in your mind, based on what you know and your experience, what types of short-term rentals should be permitted, and should they be permitted in different zones? For instance, if you look at Laguna Beach, they basically said, look, if you're in a mixed-use zone or a commercial zone, all short-term rentals are allowed, and then homestays are allowed in residential districts. And would like to get some feedback on how you all see the city of Dana Point and what we should do moving forward, if there should be any rules or no rules, or a combination of both.
If I may, I spoke with you guys yesterday about this, so you know what my stance is. But you know, seeing that there's only 6 primary and 6 homestay, but the majority of us are all non-primary, you know, it really doesn't make sense why we should segregate this by type, because the majority of us are doing non-primary. Most people do not do homestay. They don't rent rooms in their homes. I don't even know anybody in this group. I'm not sure who the primary ones are. I'm not comfortable with renting my house out, the house that I live in, to go out for a month. So I just, I think that, in my opinion, we're making a lot of focus for 12 STRs out of the 130 that we have.
Great, thanks, Miriam.
So when I first saw
Yeah.
the data, the first thing I thought was, I think this is the wrong way to cut it. I don't think there's such a thing. As we've seen the data, there's no such thing as a homestay or primary. So let's just pull that out and say that's, you can, you know, that's a different set of rules altogether. I think what you really need to address is the non-primary. What do you want non-primary to be? And is that where you draw distinctions between the types of non-primary, as opposed to, you know, keeping it all one big amorphous group? Is it, are we worried as a city about the Marriott Corporation coming in and buying in a bunch of homes and offering those as short-term rentals in our neighborhoods? Or is it, are we less concerned about people who have less than 5, or who have or are within a mile of their short-term rental, or even within the same zip code or same town as their short-term rental? I think that's where I would start looking at the data, cut it in those ways, as opposed to, you know, primary, homestay, non-primary. Let's take non-primary and see what we have in that bulk of data. Is it 60% people who live outside the country? Is it 75% who live in the same town, but they have a home, you know, within that town that they short-term rent? You know, what does that look like, so that we can see where the rules need to be adjusted?
Great, thank you. Jay Stanford, did you have any comments or feedback?
Well, I'm running in a different thought process than everyone else. I certainly agree with what's been said by the previous people. My concern has always been, how do we detect, and are we overly concerned? I think the answer is yes, about people who violate this. I think everybody in this group, I'm guessing, we're all rule keepers, and we're paying the taxes and collecting the taxes. I have always thought, from going to previous city meetings, that the ire from the homeowners has been people who are renting illegally. And is that within the scope of the effort here, or am I just should I just hold this for another time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer to that is, if you're operating, no matter what you're doing, if you're not operating under the what's allowed, you know, that's already, there's a process for that, code enforcement, and we have a process, and engaged a third party to help us try to catch those folks who are bad actors. But this is about, you know, what should be allowed versus, you know, people not following the rules.
Okay, then under that premise, I agree with the previous comments. I think that those of us, who, myself included, who are the non-primary, since we're the bulk by far, I don't know how to determine whether there is or could be a problem with what's done now, because the Coastal Commission does have a significant amount of oversight. I'd like to be educated about that.
Well, and is the point of this exercise to look forward? So we're saying, okay, this is the situation that exists today, but going forward, let's project out 10 years. What does the short-term rental landscape look like in Dana Point? And this is the ordinance that we're building for that purpose, to allow more permits to be processed, to allow people to start enjoying the program as well. Is that what we're doing here?
Well, what we haven't determined, and I think that's part of this whole process is, we have a current set of permits that are legal permits that, and we'll talk a little bit about that, about grandfathering here in a few slides. But with knowing those are mainly non-primary, is there an opportunity, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, for instance, primary residence, which could be a situation where you have a homeowner who would feel comfortable when they go out of town, a certain amount of times per year that they could list their house and it'd be a short-term rental. They would still have to get a permit. And are those less objectionable to the neighbors? And then the homestay, while we've heard, to date that nobody believes anybody's going to do it, there may be people who are interested in doing that. And should we, if nobody's going to do it, is there harm in allowing for it and making sure that we have rules in place that would prevent some of the nuisances and impacts of a homestay if they are problematic? So that's really why what we're talking about.
If people were going to be doing it, they would have been doing it, and we would have more than 6. But again, I'm reiterating my comments from yesterday, but the people who are in this group didn't hear it. My opinion is that typical homestay is renting a room in your home. You're targeting a younger demographic. You're targeting college kids. You're targeting backpackers. That's more of a hostel type situation. So now, you're introducing hostels into residential neighborhoods, and I don't see how that's any better. And my concern is that I know where this is coming from. Those opposed to short-term rentals have been really pushing for homestay. But most of us aren't doing that. So, by presenting us these options, it almost seems like, at least the fear for some of us is that, is the city going to try to eliminate non-primary? Are they going to develop this future ordinance that says, okay, if you're a homestay, you can continue renting your home, or if it's your primary residence, but we're going to eliminate non-primary, or we're just going to reduce it to a certain number? That's a concern when the majority of us are doing non-primary renters.
But that's why I think we have to look at the data. So as a short-term rental owner who has one home that I rent, that I am very cognizant of my neighbors, my neighborhood, and I want that neighborhood to stay residential and inviting and welcoming to my guests, I would be really concerned if Marriott started moving in and buying up all of my neighbors and turning all of those homes into short-term rentals. So to me, that's where my level is. My level of awareness and sensitivity on this issue is the really big hoteliers that are engaging, that are starting programs to do this. What is Dana Point going to do to protect the neighborhoods against that? And to me, that's fundamentally different than those of us who have a few properties, or 1 or 2, whatever the number is, whatever the tolerance level is, but that are local and that are managing them locally. That I think is a fundamental difference than a Marriott in some other state with, customer service that never gets to issues managing large amounts of properties.
Great. Yeah, I think so. What I hear you saying is you're concerned about a big corporate investment in the short-term rental market, so to speak, and it not being more of a 1 or 2 units, but a big company that comes in and buys up a bunch of homes.
Yeah, because that's where your enforcement is gonna fail. We had Big Casa actually 2 doors down from my current short-term rental. There was a property that used to be run by Big Casa. It was horrible. Every weekend there were bridal parties, showers, bachelor parties. it was, you just watch people come down the street with big, huge boxes of beer and you know they were going to that house. That was Vacasa. That's how they run properties. You've got, I think that's where we have to be careful is if that is the future of short-term rentals, meaning the corporations are going to come in and start buying up these homes and using them for short-term rentals, that's 10 years down the line. That's where I can see we all looking back going, why didn't we legislate against that?
Got it. Thank you. And I'm going to go to Dad. Yeah, could you give us your name? Up, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you. There you go. You're on mute. Dad's iPhone. Can't hear you. Whoever's speaking. Yeah, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? So it says Dad's iPhone. Yeah, I don't know if we have the ability to unmute somebody, John, or not.
His phone is actually showing that it's unmuted, but we still cannot hear him.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he called in on this 949-632-9957 number. Maybe he'll sort it out, but we can't hear you. I'm sorry. So I'm going to keep going here and hopefully we can figure that out. John, could you shoot him a message? Maybe he can, you could shoot him
It's usually the Zoom settings. So he has to change the microphone for the Zoom settings. It's probably on the wrong mic.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on here. If there's
Can
no
I
other
make a
comments on
comment
this
first?
one.
Eric, can I make a
Yes,
comment
please.
first?
Yeah, Jeff.
So we impose, and I think I had supposed that everyone else did, there are restrictions on age, right? And we restrict, we counsel no loud parties or anything, obviously. We try and make sure that nobody rents under the age of 21. So does that help with, well, Miriam, I think had that, was commenting towards that.
So the city actually changed it to 25. 25 is the age minimum requirement now.
Okay. All right. We have a property
And
manager.
that follows the, yeah, that follows the rental car guidelines, basically.
Okay.
You can rent a car, you can rent a short-term unit.
And then a follow-on question: does anybody think our noise complaints very egregious within the Coastal Commission's area of interest in Dana Point? Is it a problem?
You know, we've had some nuisance issues, but you know, generally the data shows that it's a very minor issue. Most of our permit holders do a really good job of managing their permits and their guests. So that you know, that's been the data to date, at least the recent data. We've had a few challenging ones, but those have been they've lost their permits. And we've also instituted some new rules, 3 strikes you're out type rules, try to encourage and discourage bad actors.
Okay, and we have tried with our neighbors when we meet them to give them our phone number, and for example, if they hear noise problems, please call us and we'll try and take care of it. I don't know how common that is.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here, which again, sort of digging a little bit deeper, and I know that we touched on this a little bit and everybody has, but you know, again, if we were to break these down by districts or by areas, is there a way that you think it's important to do it, whether it's voting districts or zoning districts, census blocks? Should we look at the coastal zone separate from the rest of the city? And if you look at what, again, Laguna Beach as an example, they have 117 STRs, 79 of those are in residential zones. They have 300 non-primary STRs in mixed use and commercial zones. and they have 165 homestays and their other zoning districts. Your thoughts on that again? If you don't have any, that's okay. But again, we really want to get some feedback on whether or not we should look at any particular way to break these down.
I think that for me, again, back to the cutting, you know, the data needs to be cut, turn me a different way to make a real informed opinion on this. But I would just give an example that I'd given in a previous meeting with you guys or on Rancho Mirage before they pulled all the permits. They do impact zones, so they give permits based on impact, and to be cautious of the residential nature of the community. They make sure that they don't have too many short-term rentals impacted into certain zones, and so that might be one way to look at this question. But for me, it's not about types. To me, it's more about population density and where you have all your short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Can you give us your name real quickly?
Sure. This is Bill Gate. I've been on here before. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm on a remote iPhone that doesn't have good connection. But I'd make a couple of real quick comments here. One of which is, I think when you start thinking about what you want the short-term rental program to look like in the future, if it were to be very problematic, I think what you'd think is if people living in a single family residential neighborhood are surrounded by short-term rentals, that's not a real good quality of life. I think would be very unhappy with that. From a property rights perspective, if you allow that to happen, then you will have big players like a Marriott or whoever buying up single family homes in a single family neighborhood. And I do not think that would be a good idea. City of San Clemente, I believe, has prohibited that in the way they've said it. So if you're going to set up where you want to have short-term rentals, I think no one can argue with if you have it in the denser areas that have hotels or motels close by, close to the restaurants, close to mixed use. But I would suggest to you that if you stick it in a wholly residential neighborhood where families are, running their lives, taking their kids to schools, I think that could be potentially problematic. So you want a few there, maybe with a property rights issue, you can't help it, but I don't think you want to make sure that that's where the bulk of your short-term rentals are.
So I have to disagree with that. I'm sorry. My property that I own is in a residential area. I've had my neighbors commend my rental and complain about the long-term tenants that are on the other side. So I
agree with you.
I think it has to do with the homeowner and the management of the rental. I live next to a long-term tenant that keeps me up past 1 a.m. every weekend. I don't have issues like that with any of my short-term rentals because we have rules in place and we can get cited and we can get fined. But a long-term tenant, you can't get rid of them. You can't do anything.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiment. However, it is anecdotal. So just because you in a residential neighborhood manage your property at the 100th percentile, if there is a large number, I think it's an undue burden for that residential neighborhood. I was going to put a property into short-term rentals in a residential neighborhood, not in Dana Point. And then I thought about it and I looked at the neighborhood and I didn't think it was appropriate. And I didn't frankly do it. So once again, if it's a percentage that the city wants to look at, a small percentage can be in different pockets and have different criteria. That's not to say it's wholly exclusionary, but I think you want them in the denser populated mixed use areas. That makes a lot of sense. So I understand you're the best property owner in your neighborhood, and that's great.
So Bill, what I hear you saying is, really looking at, do we have distance requirements or do we have, some type of measurement that says, you don't have short-term rentals on all sides of, let's say, a single family home or a duplex or something. Is that accurate?
So I would say, look at the makeup of the neighborhood. How many are apartments? How many are condos? So specifically look at, in my instance, the Lantern District. The Lantern District is eclectic, to say the least. It's a mixed bag of everything. And in a mixed bag environment, I think the city has much less of a risk where homeowners are going to complain that their properties are being devalued, because as the last participant said, long-term renters generally are a lot more problematic than the short-term rentals. But in a single family neighborhood, the cul-de-sac neighborhood, I don't want a short-term rental on that street with where I'm raising my family, so I would say keep that one to a minimum and look at the densities. Look, it's pretty obvious where short-term rentals kind of make sense within our city. And take a look at those areas and make some decisions that the city's going to have a percentile of, hey, so many should be, because of a property rights issue. Everyone has a right to do whatever they want with their properties, but we want so many in certain areas because certain areas can take the weight of short-term rentals. Certain areas can't. I don't think anyone would disagree if you lived on a cul-de-sac and you had more than one short-term rental, or even one short-term rental. If you had more than one, you'd be pretty unhappy.
I think
Right, thanks, Bill.
the HOAs in a lot of those areas would cover that as well. So
yeah, most HOAs
so
for private, most HOAs for private residencies do not have anything written down for short-term rentals, and I have experience with that. It's because most HOAs for private residences never even thought of something like a short-term rental. And so they're talking of that, they're trying to put it in, but they have short-term, but HOAs can never get a quorum to put anything to amend a CC&R ever.
So where is your rental located? Is it in a mixed use commercial area?
It's in the Lantern District on Violet Lantern. So there's everything is there.
Okay, so we've got a limited amount of time, but I want to keep going here. I think it's a great conversation from everybody, and really want to move to this next question, which is one that I know will be, we need to really be clear on, and that relates to our existing permits. So we have a number of existing permits. I want to say it's about 135 currently. What should we do with those?
Keep them.
Absolutely grandfather them in.
Okay.
But this question sounds like it's about a transfer. I mean, does it run with the land? And that would be that would contravene all property law out there.
Well, I think I might have skipped here. Well, maybe my slides are backwards, but
So that, yeah.
let's see it in here. So let's talk both. So we've got two issues, since I don't have the slide up, but we have an issue of existing permits and whether we should keep those, grandfather those, and then within that, or even in the future, other permits, should we provide some process for transferring existing permits, whether they're the grandfathered ones or in the event we move forward and we allow more permitted ones, what should we do with transfers?
I think we should allow the transfers. In Newport Beach, they allow a permit to be transferred to a new owner. I think as a realtor, that does increase the marketability of a home. Just like if you were selling an income property and you can use the rents, as part of the marketing and part of the valuation of the property. So I think that would definitely help. My opinion.
I actually disagree on this one. I think so it speaks to the other question, which is, should we grandfather the existing permits in? Absolutely. We have been through hell and back complying and conforming and contributing. And, I think the violations speak for themselves. You've got a core group of 150 or so permit holders that have been fine, upstanding citizens and deserve to keep those permits for as long as they want them. But I can't say that about the person who's going to buy my house. I don't know that they will have the same focus on the neighborhood that I do. And would they have the same live to the same standards? I don't know. I'd rather see them reapply.
Yeah, I think the city wants to maybe take this slow. You've got so much on your plate. If you want to address that grandfathering, frankly, do it the way the marina does it with their slips. It's grandfathered to family members upon the decedent of the owner of the property. Check, you've got an X in the box and work it later at a different time, but that's the only transfer I think you do at this moment that's appropriate, and then you've addressed it.
Does the city impose a number of rentals permits granted per district or per the city?
We haven't got to that point yet. I think that, the idea of not transferring would bring that question up is, in the event we have a cap, and let's just say the cap is, what we have today, and you sell your home, what do we do with that permit? Do we allow another property owner somewhere else to apply? Do we have a waiting list? I mean, there's, this could spiral down a long, dark path. Obviously, we're just trying to figure out what the best approach here is, whether it's to allow for transfers or not.
I would not allow the transfers if I were the city.
If I were buying a home, we already have our rental property and have the permit. If I were buying one, I would almost think it would be unfair if I were to purchase a home that didn't have a permit, as opposed to buying one that did. As somebody, is that a future lawsuit coming in, or I buy a home and you won't let me, the city won't let me rent my place out because I bought the wrong home?
You have to reapply.
So I'm just talking about the issue of transferability. How would everybody consider that fair to say, well, this property has a permit, and so they can rent, yet another property cannot because they applied and didn't and weren't able to get a permit?
I think it's eminently fair.
I can't speak for this city, obviously, but I do own rentals in Palm Springs, and I own one in Nashville and one in Florida. They do not transfer no matter what. So I think it's pretty standard to not transfer them. The new owner always has to reapply. And I while that is unfortunate for the person who owns it, because obviously you could sell your house at a premium if you had a limited permit. I do understand why they do that. And, if there's waiting lists or other things, it's not necessarily fair to everybody else waiting who maybe bought years ago thinking I'm going to be on this waiting list, and I just keep getting bumped because this, permit transfers forever and there's a cap. So I think across the country, it's very largely not transferable.
Well, it's just, again, back to property law. It's not a typical provision, that you talk about running with the land. You don't usually have these types of permits, if you will, ordinances that run with the land. And just to second that, sort of the reason for non-transferability is that you start to get into that slippery slope where you're talking about zoning. And that's where we short-term rental owners, have an issue with our contrarians, the people on the other side of the fence, because, sure, a multifamily unit is zoned in that way. A short-term rental is not zoned to be short-term rental, as far as I'm aware. So if you start talking about a permit that's running with the land and transfers over to new owners as they purchase, then you're talking about basically changing the fundamental character of the home, which is, to me, a problem.
Great. I think that's all really good feedback on that question. So thank you. I want to move to the next one, which we talked about yesterday a little bit, and the question really is, if you have should we have a maximum rental nights per year? And it really, I believe, the focus here is on the idea of a primary residence. So if I'm a primary resident owner and I want to rent out my home a certain amount of times per year. Should we allow for that? And what should that be? Which wouldn't be a non-primary resident. It would be one where you have a limited amount of nights that you can rent it. You could see San Francisco allows 90 nights. Pismo has 182 night maximum, and Palm Springs has 36 contracts. And I would assume what that means is they can basically do short-term rentals 36 times a year. And a short-term rental obviously defined as anything less than 30 days. And should we consider that?
It's 28 days in Palm Springs, but yeah, that's exactly correct.
Okay.
Oh, I think you have to look at the obvious impact if you were to do that. And that is that everybody and his brother would be renting their properties June, July, and August. A short-term rentals for their 30 or 60 days. I think you need to think that's what reality would be, because people are going to do it for snowbirds in the winter. It's easy to get a 30-day rental. If you do a la carte short-term rental stuff, you'll see that short-term rental blossom to maybe an unacceptable number during the summer months.
But isn't that assuming that everybody is waiting with their rental agreements to rent? Not, I think most people, when you say most people own homes and they don't rent, I mean, in Dana Point, isn't that true? I mean, I don't think that, would it get out of hand if you
were to open, if the city were to open the floodgates to say that anybody can apply for and rent their house as a short-term rental for a maximum of 30 or 60 days per annum, I think what you would see is an influx of people jumping on Airbnb to rent their house at rent their properties at the inflated summer rates that we see today. And I think you would have a fantastic increase in the number of short-term rentals during the summer months. I just think that's what would happen. I think it's quite logical. Does the city want to see that? And how big could that be? And would that be a huge problem that we'd have to throttle back and say, well, we made a mistake, we're not doing that again?
Well, I think it would be an increase. I don't know if anybody knows it would be a fantastic increase. Many people don't have the schedule to just leave and rent out to snowbirds. A lot of people are in Dana Point because they like Dana Point and they're there year round. We're there for that reason.
And plus, a lot of people don't want to rent out their primary home. I mean, I know I don't, with all of my personal belongings. So
I agree.
It's a lot of work to have to empty out your home just to rent it out for a few months.
For the revenues that can be received, I think you would see quite a few people do it. All I'm suggesting is the city needs to put a cap on the amount of short-term rentals it wants in the city. It needs to be a finite number that the city probably should look at it on a seasonal basis, because I think you would see a propensity of a lot more short-term rentals in the summer months when the rents are doubled or tripled what they are in the winter months.
I think you cut this between, I think there should be a line under non-primary. So for primary and homestay, sure, cap that. In order to keep those permits the way they are and have those permits, then you can only do it for a certain number of nights per year. But for non-primary, I think that's a different category altogether. And that's, there shouldn't be limits. It should be run as we've been running them, and that should be a different group.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think the city is going to open up a can of worms with any caps anywhere, because it just becomes a lot more like paperwork and chasing people, trying to figure out, not the law-abiding people, but some people are going to try to figure out ways to get around the caps and the limits. You know, it happens all the time in every city. So I feel like it's opening a can of worms to limit it for non-primary.
Yeah, I agree. It would be a logistical nightmare to try to keep track of how many nights somebody were renting. I mean, how would you do that?
Yeah, how do you do it? How do you know who's being honest? And you know, you go on any of these pages and people are like, oh, I mark this as my primary and I do this, and they're not following the rules. But I think make a level playing field for the people who are trying to do it legally and not, create a hassle for the city. I think that's the best thing to do.
Okay, great. I think that's, really helpful information and appreciate the input on that. I want to move on to really our last slide and preface it with one of the things we heard in the first round is a significant concern, mainly from housing advocates around rental stock and, where short-term rentals should be located, and should we be locating them in areas where we have a lot of renters and displacing renters. Love to get your thoughts on, how should we look at that?
Okay, I have to speak on this issue because I've been looking at rentals, and renters are not being displaced by short-term rentals. They're being displaced by the market. There is nothing for rent in this area that's affordable anymore. I was thinking of selling my house this summer, and I was looking, okay, well, we're gonna have to get ready to move because houses are being sold in 3 days. So I looked at rentals. There was nothing under $10,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the city of Dana Point per month. Those are short-term rental prices, but that's for a long-term rental. So renters are not being displaced by short-term rentals. They're being displaced by the market, the natural consequence of Del Prado and all the rentals that are going in there. The minimum price is $4,000 for a 1-bedroom. That's not caused by a short-term rental issue.
I think I think the advocacy group that showed up from Los Angeles and read a prepared statement really was just out of order and a bit of a red herring. And I completely agree. The market is driving what rental costs are going to be in Dana Point. We're never going back to the rental prices that we had 20 years ago of $600 a month for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath Ocean View. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with both those comments, and we should be not disappointed with the fact that prices, rental and sale prices are high. It makes Dana Point an upscale place, and I don't think we want to go against that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to note, we own a mortgage company and we do a ton of business in the Inland Empire and Riverside County. And this is not like an OC problem. This is literally everywhere. Everyone's selling and no one's going to sell and, rent for low rent that doesn't even cover the mortgage. It's just not going to happen. So I think this is an everywhere problem forced by the market. And I agree. You don't want to necessarily, devalue for all the homeowners that live there. You want these values to go up. It's helping their probably biggest asset in their life. So this is literally an everywhere problem in places where they do not have short-term rentals. We have clients asking us daily, like, well, I have a 3-month gap and I cannot find a rental anywhere, like in San Bernardino. So this is a problem everywhere. And I don't think it has anything to do with short-term rentals.
Yeah, I agree. And just as a realtor too, with the cost of some of these homes, I have clients who are renting their homes furnished for 31 days because that's going to cover their mortgage more so than, a long-term renter. And they can do that legally, but I'm just saying it's not cheap to purchase a property around here. So regardless, the cost of housing is going up in this area.
Yeah, I don't think anybody, is going to buy a house and have a mortgage for $6,000 a month and say like, yeah, I'll rent this affordably. So I don't think this is going to solve the problem in any way.
Well, okay, great. Well, I appreciate that. It's, again, great feedback. We're running out of time here, but I wanted to hand it back to John real quickly to just walk through the next steps, and then we'll close out with any Q&A and any parting comments. So John, you want to jump on here?
Thanks, Eric. So just to allow everybody to be informed of the process for the next steps, at all of the Planning Commission meetings, which are every other week on Mondays, a briefing will be given by the subcommittee to the Planning Commission, just to allow them to be informed of updating them on recent activities as well as upcoming meetings. So that will be happening at every meeting. And then we also will be having future public meetings. Those dates are to be determined. However, there will be similar public outreach and meetings as with the phase one. So we do have a public outreach program to lay that all out. And then to further extend our public outreach efforts, we will be sending out a citywide informational flyer that will be going to all of the properties within the city to ensure that everyone is notified of the process. And then there is the possibility of additional stakeholder meetings as necessary as we begin to move or continue to move through this process. So we may be reaching out to you in the future for additional feedback.
Can I ask, are hotel employees being included as part of this stakeholder meeting? They're not, that was one thing that I noticed at the last city meeting is, all of these hotel employees were coming and they're, majority of these people don't live in Dana Point. So I'm wondering how and why are they being included as part of the stakeholder in this decision?
Well, we have no stake. So when we use the word stakeholder, that's very specific. We have 4 groups, and none of those 4 groups include employees that live within Dana Point. The 4 groups include management companies, which was yesterday. Today is permit holders. Tomorrow, I don't know what it is, but the next 2 are residents that live near or have been impacted by short-term rentals, as well as the last one, which is the known community groups. And those are very specific stakeholders. Then we have the broad meetings, and anybody's allowed to come to those. I certainly can't speak to how the employees of the hotels ended up at the hearing, but they're public and they're allowed to be there and speak.
That's how they got there. But
I have another question.
So-
I spoke about the data, and has the data been reviewed? I feel like I've seen it where we know how many of the short-term rental permits today are held by one person. How many? Like, I have one. So and so has 20. A corporation has 50. Is that data ever? Is it ever available? Or where people live that hold the permits? Are they out of town? Are they local?
John, I don't know that I know the answer to that question.
So we do have the data in terms of the property owners and how many own multiples. I think we can discuss internally legally what we're able to provide. I think there's some general information that we can provide in terms of how many are single owners, how many are multiple owners. If there's someone that's a super owner that owns more than 10 or something like that, which I don't think that there is. But I think that that's definitely something that we can provide at future meetings to educate everyone in terms of that level of information.
I think as you're thinking about the next phase, that may be with that non-primary where you may want to look at, drilling down into that and seeing what you have and what you want it to be. And then looking at that type of sort of regulation.
Yeah, great. That's a great feedback, Deanna. Appreciate it. I would love to actually see that myself. So, Jonathan, let's add that to the list of things to discuss. Before I close this out, are there any other questions or
I have one
comments from the group?
Yeah, I have one comment. This is Bill again. This is just an educational comment, if you will. I was watching a YouTube video that I would encourage certainly the city council to look at. There's a plethora of YouTube videos talking about how to start your own Airbnb business without any money down and make $1 million. They're very slick. It makes a lot of sense. It works in a lot of areas. And that's exactly what we don't want in Dana Point. And what it is entrepreneurial businessmen going to people who have properties for sale or for rent and striking a deal that they will give them more than they're asking for rental price if they will allow them to turn it into an Airbnb and they will manage it. Just great educational stuff. Just Google it, just look at it on YouTube, the Airbnb business models. And there's got to be 5 or 6 people that are literally selling courses on how to open up Airbnb businesses. A lot of tricks that even I never thought of.
Yeah, it's called
Thank you, Bill.
rental
That's
arbitrage or
good.
corporate, corporate leasing or rental arbitrage. And one thing I would really tell the city that if you want to limit that, just make sure when they get the permit that the owner is getting the permit, that you have a deed and the owner is actually obtaining the permit. That will help to limit that, because these people get the permits under their own name, but they do all the tricks with primary homes and all that. So that's why I don't necessarily think limiting it to primary homes is valuable, because you just have people trying to bend the system. So
Right. Well, this is the
Great.
rule book on how
Well,
to
I
bend
really-
the system.
yeah, exactly.
I will be watching that. I'll watch that tonight, and I appreciate that. Good feedback. I had no idea those were out there. I want to thank everybody again for being here today, for talking and sharing your thoughts with us and giving us your feedback. It's really helpful for us as we try to, come to some conclusion on what's appropriate for Dana Point. And I'd encourage all of you to stay engaged, stay as engaged as you are now, and get even more engaged. And you'll be notified for any future meetings. And again, appreciate your time today and your thoughtful feedback. You guys all have a great week.
Thank you.